But we're going to go right over now to Bryce Lane. Bryce is a lecturer, professor emeritus from NC State University, has won every teaching award available through universities. He really has inspired multiple generations of horticulturists here from NC State, but then he also speaks all over the place and inspires people everywhere. And it's one of the few times you'll have a speaker who is a multiple, at least 3-time Emmy Award winner, giving you a plant talk. So fantastic. And I'm going to just go ahead and turn it over to Bryce. He's going to give you some tips on how to be a better gardener.
Mark, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. It is always exciting, but also frustrating to be the last person on the docket for a symposium like this. It's exciting because I get to hear other great speakers, and it's a real honor for me to be part of this symposium this morning and to be on the same program with Mark Wethington and Basil. I really appreciated hearing. It's always great when, as a gardener, as a horticulturist, you hear other people talk about things that you've been talking about in the same vein, and it's very reaffirming in that I get to actually speak with a little bit more confidence, because a lot of times what I think I know, sometimes I'm not sure that I'm absolutely 100% correct on it, and it's always good to listen to other professionals. And there are a couple of words that have come to mind between Mark's talk and Basil's talk as well. One has to do with diversity. I couldn't agree more. I think the more we mix it up, the better. We're creating gardens that marry well with the current ecosystem. Second is balance. I think that as gardeners, we need to always be thinking about balance. So with that, I got to jump right in because I got 45 minutes and it takes me 20 to introduce myself. So I'm going to share my screen and make sure that I've got the right screen here. And we will jump right in. There we go. So anyway, welcome everybody. I'm thrilled to be here. The title of my presentation is 10 Tips to Better Gardening, Southern Style. I'm going to make some assumptions about you, the audience. I'm going to assume that many of you have recently or within the past few years maybe moved to the southern region of the United States from other regions in the country or elsewhere. I'm also going to assume that there are lots of gardening endeavors that you face that you haven't solved yet. If you're a gardener like me, I'm still trying to solve many of the gardening problems that I've had for a number of years. 10 tips, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to gardening tips. Here's a tip I hadn't even thought about, but in my title slide that you see here. Guys, if you ever want to attract goldfinch on a regular basis during the year, then plant black-eyed Susans with Verbena bonariensis, verbena on a stick. And between those two plants, you get a great, one, color combination, and two, because of the seeds that both the composite flowers of the black-eyed Susan and the clusters of purple flowers produce, those seeds, highly attractive to lots of different bird species. And the goldfinch will come in about 4:15 every July afternoon to feed. And if you get lucky, if you got your camera nearby, you can grab a photograph. So there's tip number one. A couple things that you need to know about me. First of all, I was raised in Western Massachusetts and moved to Raleigh, North Carolina in 1981. So no, I'm not a damn Yankee anymore. I'm a naturalized citizen in that I've lived here for a long time. I've had young, and they are now producing native North Carolinians. I'm also a pretty well-seasoned gardener in that I've been gardening in North Carolina for a good 37 years now, and the gardening that I've done is all pretty much in the same location. Gardened in the same spot for 37 years, and that translates into a couple of things. One, made all my mistakes in the same place. Two, I've been able to plant more plants than I could ever fit in this quarter acre, because anytime a plant dies, that spells opportunity for me to go ahead and plant another. The other thing is I'm really able to mix it up from a plant diversity perspective. Trees, shrubs, vines, ground covers, annuals, and perennials, and I try them all. And I find that I have a incredibly rich wildlife in my garden. The other thing is gardening in the same spot for 37 years, practicing good soil management, Basil. I have great soil, and I have great soil not because I've fertilized it with chemical fertilizers. I have great soil because I've mulched and incorporated organic matter, rotting stuff for all those years. And so my soil is something that I don't have to worry about. And for those of you new to North Carolina that are looking at red clay, please understand that that's not the end all. That's the beginning of a good soil. I think, and I've got some comments to make about that. So if you come by my garden, you're likely to find me somewhere amongst the trees, shrubs, vines, and ground covers. So before we actually jump into the 10 tips, I want to set the scene. And I think this is a real valuable thing to do for us as gardeners, whether we've gardened in North Carolina for all our lives or whether we're new to this region. There's a website called plantmaps.com. Guys, put it on your bookmarks of your browser because it provides climatological information for regions all over the country, and you can learn about your region. I maintain that as gardeners, we need to be full-time climatologists and meteorologists, and then gardening should fall behind that. And plantmaps.com really helps you learn about the place you're gardening in. So for instance, you can type in on your zip code. There's my zip code in North Raleigh, 27615, and check out look at what you can learn about that information. Look what you can learn about the area that you live. Average minimum temperature, average maximum temperature for every month, average precipitation. So you can see average precipitation for Raleigh's about 45 to 46 inches, and you can actually see what months of the year have the higher levels, and you can see we're pretty well distributed across the line. All-time record high in Raleigh, North Carolina, 105 degrees. All-time record low, -9 degrees below zero. I'm happy to say, I don't know if I should be happy to, but I'm here to say that I've actually experienced both August 2007, 105, and January 22nd, 1985, -9. I spent most of the day underneath my house wrapping pipes with old t-shirts. The U.S. Hardiness Zone Map that's on that website shows that Raleigh, North Carolina is Zone 7B. And that, guys, what that translates into is a prediction that on any given winter morning, we could wake up and the temperature could be between 5 and 10 degrees. Some winters it never gets that low. Other winters it may get below that, a la 1985. But we're Zone B, and then you can see all the other different zones in North Carolina. North Carolina is incredibly diverse when it comes to the possible cold temperatures from A, which is above 10 degrees, all the way to 7A, 6A, and B, and some even maintain there might be a little bit of Zone 5 on the mountain, on the top of Mount Mitchell. Nonetheless, we are a Zone 7. Central North Carolina is a Zone 7 hardiness zone. Now, the American Hort Society produces a map called a Heat Zone Map. And frankly, I think we need to pay attention to this almost more than we do the hardiness zone map. By the way, for those of you who don't know, most plants that you'd buy at a garden center have a hardiness zone rating. Okay, if we go back, okay, in the hardiness zone rating, if my plant has a hardiness zone rating of 7B or below, then it's going to grow well in my region. If it's an 8, if I see a plant with 8, then I'm thinking maybe it might, maybe it won't grow here in Raleigh. And there's some very famous gardeners, some probably even listening or paying attention. Tony Avent, a lot of people, we like to push the Zone 8s into Zone 7 just to see what might happen. But here's the map that American Hort Society put together called a Heat Zone Map. And if you look, you can see that Raleigh, North Carolina is Zone 7, which indicates that we can count on an average of 61 to 90 days above 86 degrees. And so that translates into something I'm going to be talking today a lot about, and that's something called heat load. And so with that many days above 86 degrees, you can see that we have different challenges as gardeners than, say, those gardeners in Asheville that are looking at days above 86 degrees, just less than 10, 1 to 7 days. I mean, that's quite remarkable to see that they don't have the same level of heat load. And frankly, plants are incredibly sensitive to heat load. Now, for you newcomers to North Carolina from up north, check this out. The average last frost in Raleigh, North Carolina is somewhere about mid-April, 21st to the 30th. That's when chance of frost goes down significantly. Some say April 15th. If we combine that with the average first frost, and that's when might we likely see 32 degrees again, it's somewhere between November 1st and November 10th. Now, I've lived in Raleigh long enough to actually have seen the first frost come, first 32 degree temperature come December, early December, and that's a long growing season. But in general, if as gardeners, be it vegetable, be it fruits, be it all the ornamental plants, we have in North Carolina, in central North Carolina, we have an average number of frost-free days that we can garden and not have to worry about 32 degrees between 196 and 200 days. And I think that's just fantastic. That enables us to garden with more vegetables in the fall, a fall vegetable garden. You plant your cool season crops now. You can actually be harvesting broccoli and cabbage and spinach late in the fall because of the long frost-free days that we have. So that just kind of sets the scene for the kind of weather, this kind of climate that we deal with. Obviously, the fall can be quite tumultuous in that it can be incredibly warm and dry, and then turn around and be incredibly wet and tropical, thanks to hurricanes and tropical storms that approach us. So we have those challenges to deal with as well. I wanted to identify some of what I thought were some of the advantages and some of the disadvantages to gardening in the South, seeing that I've had the opportunity to do some gardening in the North. And these are just some of the ones that came to mind as I was preparing this presentation. Obviously, I just identified one. The frost-free growing season that we have is extended in the spring and extended in the fall, and that gives us more frost-free days. Y'all, we get more bang for our buck when we buy annuals that are killed by freezing temperatures. Tender perennials that are marginal or plants that are tropical, we have all those heat days, so we can get lots of good growth from tropical plants. And the money that we spend on them, knowing that they'll probably die when the freezing temperatures come unless we bring them inside, that we get more bang for our buck than if we lived, say, in Pennsylvania. There we may buy the same plant, not get the same amount of growth, and then have it die even sooner. Not only that, but the expanded plant selection. I think one of the things that made that JC loved so much about North Carolina was that he had the ability to collect plants, more and more plants from around the world to evaluate here for their suitability because of the long growing season we had. And in fact, you know, the Arboretum touts that there's never a time where you could go to the Arboretum and not see something flowering. All 24/7, 365 days a year. And so we have that ability to create more heterogeneous gardens, more diverse gardens in our own backyards. Other advantages, well, we have this thing called pine straw or pine needle mulch. And you might be questioning, why have you put that as an advantage? Well, you'll see. It's a great mulch material that most folks from up north have never had the opportunity to use. The longleaf pine yields this wonderful material that can be used as a mulch. And we have clay soil. Now, you see the question mark after clay soil. You're saying, well, what do you mean we have clay soil? You know, clay soil is a mineral component in the soil that contributes to good soil fertility. Soils that have high amounts of clay can be incredibly fertile and have the ability to be very fertile. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not a disadvantage to clay soil. But after this many years of living in North Carolina, I'm way more excited about the clay soil we have than not excited about it. But we have to manage our soils by adding more and more rotting material, more organic material into our soils to help mitigate the structural problem that we have with a heavy clay soil. That's porosity and drainage. How about some disadvantages of living in the South? Well, this is the big one for me, heat load. And we're going to talk a lot about how heat load influences the decisions we make with the plants that we use in our own gardens. Here's one that if you're coming from the north, you might learn to realize is one that really can make you angry. And that is, I call it the summer doldrums, the early July to mid-August, where our gardens tend to fade in their beauty and color. And we have to deal with water stress. We have to deal with the fact that some of those plants that were flowering profusely in June have kind of tailed off in these hot months. Even our tomato plants even get tired of bearing all the fruit come, mid-August to early September. So we've got this summer doldrums that kind of relates back to heat load. Hey, for some plants, if you're coming from the north, guess what? It's not cold enough in the winter. And because it's not cold enough in the winter, you may not be able to get away with using the same plants or the same varieties of plants that you used up north. And secondly, one of the big problems with not being cold enough in the winter is during very, very mild winters, we run the risk of not suppressing some of the detrimental insect populations that attack our plants, and so we have to employ even more drastic management strategies to get them under control, get them managed, and so that can be a problem as well. And oh, look at this, disadvantages. Pine needle mulch. It's an advantage in that it's an added mulch that drains well and is beautiful to look at. It's a disadvantage because it's overused in the southern landscape. And I'm going to show you a photograph here in a second to show you how it can be overused. Second disadvantage on this line, obviously the clay soil. Many of you move into a new home and you look at that soil and it's almost 100% clay. Just remember, urban soils in subdivisions are not the true soil that was there before that area was built. The topsoil has been scraped off and moved, probably sold, and it becomes our job to take that subsoil, which is predominantly that red clay, and then build it into good sustainable soil again. So some things never change. For as long as I've lived in North Carolina, and Basil, you'll appreciate this slide, okay? Here's the negative with pine straw. People don't know how to use it correctly. And so I was driving to the library one Christmas season, and oh my gosh, I pulled over and started taking photographs. The amount of pine straw is 3 to 5 times too deep in this landscape. These folks are just have completely and totally lost their minds when it comes to using pine straw. Okay, check this out. I mean, there's your classic mulch volcano. And you heard Basil do a great job of explaining why this is so detrimental to trees as far as compromising their health. When you use mulch, no matter what kind of mulch you use, recommendation would be to only a total of 2 inches max in a year, and please, please, please keep that mulch away from the root collar. It's so important to be able to see and point to the root collar of any and all your trees. And you've heard both Basil and Mark talk about that, so I won't go into it. But I do want to talk about establishment. Mark, thanks so much for talking about establishment. The concept behind establishment when we plant trees and shrubs in the South is incredibly important. Water loss can be a huge part of establishment. Look at these statistics here. Establishment time. This is the amount of time after you've planted a plant that the plant's got to re-establish itself. And establishment is defined as when the plant has the ability to absorb ample water, nutrition, and oxygen from the soil. And that root system has been compromised. No matter what kind of plant you buy, there's a certain level of compromise. And therefore, it takes time for those plants to become established. So check out the establishment time frame. It ranges from 3 months to 2 years. Trees require about 10 gallons per week per inch of caliper. I was so thrilled when I heard Basil, say 10 to 20 gallons. But there's a guidepost for us, okay? But look, remember the trees establishment may take up to 2 years for a tree, anywhere from 12 months to 18 months. So if you think about it, if you plant a tree, you water it for a month or two, and then you forget about it, that's probably a problem. And again, this is ideal, and most of the time we're going to be putting supplemental water in during summer months. Medium shrub, 10 gallons per week. Flower bed, 5 gallons per 10 square feet per week. Lawns, 15 to 30 gallons per 10 square week, per 10 square feet per week. Lawns by far are one of the most, the high maintenance plants in all of the landscape. And I'll have some comments to make about that. Y'all, when it comes to gardening success, we need to stop thinking about the whole, and we need to start thinking about the whole. All right, and many of you have heard me say this before. The photograph you see on the left, you know, Basil talked about the size of the planting hole. The bigger, the better, 2 to 3 times. I couldn't agree more. But frankly, I no longer recommend this kind of an approach to planting trees in the landscape, planting shrubs in the landscape. I more recommend what you see on the right, and that is thinking about the bed, prepping the entire bed and then planting into the bed. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, that means it's going to change the way that I think about the way that I design my home landscape. Absolutely. It's so important to point out. Okay, we've got to be thinking about the areas where we want plants to grow and creating areas that have soil that is high in organic matter and is sustainable for plants without lots of input. That's why we call it sustainability, is we're trying to reduce the inputs. We create beds. The idea of a tree in the backyard lawn, we'll talk about the competition that occurs there. Hey, right now, starting in October, November, best time to plant in the South as far as plants are concerned, okay? And the best time to transplant. Saw some questions in the chat and on the question and answer as far as when should I be transplanting. I like to start transplanting and planting late fall. I'm talking late October, early November. And you know what? You can go down to your local garden centers, and at that time, you can actually get some pretty good deals on shrubs and trees, and even perennials that they're marking down because starting to drop their leaves, die back. Root system establishment works great in fall planting. So think beds. Think about how you might create landscape beds in and around your home garden. Some of you are looking at that going, where's the turf? We'll talk about turf a little bit later. So anyway, there's my introduction. And now I've got the time remaining to go through the most 10 very important tips for Southern gardeners, okay? And they're not in order of priority. They're just in order of what I thought would be the 10 tips. Wrote them down, and here we go. Heat load. For those of you who are new to North Carolina, new to the South, heat load is another dynamic that we have to be concerned about with our plants. And so I ask you, what is your attitude and your latitude? And can you take the heat? Because in North Carolina, you're gonna have heat, and plants are gonna have heat to deal with. This photograph that you see was taken at the Coastal Maine Botanic Garden on August 1st. Can you believe just the vibrant colors that you see in these plants? Okay, pigmentation in plants and flowers, okay, is often a function of day and night temperatures. And the warmer the day temperatures and the warmer the night temperatures, the less sugar the plant has to metabolize into pigment, into the reds, purples, and blue pigments, the anthocyanin pigments. As a result, you can get incredible colors in a place like Maine or Vermont. If some of you are from the upper Midwest, you say, oh, my perennials look awesome in the middle of the summertime. That's because warm sunny days, probably not a zone 7 heat zone map, warm sunny days, but your night temperatures are cool enough that the sugars that are produced by the plant via photosynthesis are conserved and can get pumped into more flowers and pumped into more color pigmentation. North Carolina, we should be expecting our midsummer gardens to look somewhat washed out because of the amount of sugar that gets used in respiration because of the high summer temperatures. So here's this beautiful hydrangea arborescens planted in full sun around the cafe at the Coastal Maine Botanic Garden. And look at the size of the flowers. This is hydrangea arborescens Abe 2, that's the cultivar. Maybe you've heard of it as Incrediball. These giant flower heads, you can see based on the size of that giant head in the picture. But if you try to grow this plant in North Carolina, you have challenges with two things. One, the number of flowers. Two, no way can you plant this plant in full sun. And three, you're going to get flopping. You're going to get these branches that get so long that first thunderstorm that comes along, down they go. So those are challenges we have in North Carolina that we don't have in, say, up north. And here's what I mean. Here's Annabelle hydrangea planted in full sun at the Missouri Bach Garden as in a rain garden. I don't know about y'all, but I can't grow my Annabelle hydrangeas in full sun. If I do, I can't keep up with the moisture demand, and they tend to even, so I'll get some leaf margin burn. So even though the sunlight is different, the big challenge here has to do with the level of heat. All right, and the warmer it gets, the faster you get water movement through the plants, and as a result, you have to creep into the shade a little bit more with some plants that maybe you've grown up north in sunnier location. And Annabelle hydrangea is a perfect example of that. Secondly, I suffer a lot from flopping with a lot of my plants, and that flopping is often a function of the fact that in the springtime it gets so warm here so quickly that the stems grow faster and longer than they do in areas like Maine, where the springs have very slow incremental temperature increases. Does that make sense? Okay, and so what you get is you get a stiffer stem and you get a shorter stem where you have springs that have a more predictable incremental increase in temperature. Whereas in southern gardens, in February, you get a week at 70, 75. Then in early March, you can get these weeks where it gets so warm that stimulates cell division and cell elongation to the point where a lot of your perennials and some of your shrubs can get so tall, top heavy, that when you get your first thunderstorms in the summertime, you get flopping. So that's a challenge. Mark mentioned hydrangea corsifolia. Amen, Mark, on hydrangea corsifolia, but here's little honey. And little honey is you can see how beautiful it is in my garden. That's a full sun location where it's getting maybe about 4 or 5 hours of sun. Full sun technically is 6.5 hours of direct sunlight. So there's little honey. And then as April moves into May, we start to get some heat load. Look what's happening to the leaves, all right? Now I'm trying to hydrate. I'm trying to keep up with the watering needs of this plant. But look what we're getting. We're getting some leaf margin burn. We're getting some necrotic leaf development. Now in the sunny location, look at the flower heads. We get lots of flowers. The sunnier it is, you're going to get more flowers. That's the good news. Okay, the leaves are more yellow. Okay, on the outside because of the sun. But as soon as the temperature starts to get up into the 80s and low 90s. These yellow leaf plants are going to suffer because of the heat load. I was so excited to plant a Canthus mollis, the Tasmanian angel, because of the variegated leaves. And I've got this in an area where it just gets just about an hour of morning sun. And it turns out I'm going to have to put this in full shade. All right, not because of the sunlight. It's the combination of sun with the heat load. You see the way the margins of the leaves are burning? So y'all, for many of plants that are touted as being plants that can take a little bit of sun, got to be careful how much sun you give them, and then what happens with leaves like this with moisture. I've since moved this little honey hydrangea underneath an oak tree. It gets about 2 hours of morning sun, and the rest of the day it's shade. I don't get any more margin burn, but I get half as many flowers. What do you gain? What do you lose? That's the key there. Here are 2 plants that I do not grow in central North Carolina, Hockenacloa on the left and mountain laurel on the right. Now, just because I don't grow them doesn't mean they won't grow in central North Carolina, but you've got to have a very unique and interesting microclimate for these plants to be protected, for the soil to stay cooler or moderated, and to protect them from heat load. So these 2 shots of Hockenacloa and mountain laurel are from places where it's just cooler. Did you say dwarf? J.C. Ralston used to say, the late J.C. Ralston used to say, there's no such thing as a dwarf plant. They only plants that grow slower than the others. But here's a plant, Metasequoia glyptostroboides, Shearman's Northlight, also known as Northlight. Okay, the dawn redwood, dwarf Northlight. Here it is planted at the Arboretum. I was so intrigued by this plant. Dwarf, MrMaple.com sells this tree. and they advertise, not 4 to 6 inches. That's my typo. 4 to 6 feet in 15 years is what they have on their website. 4 to 6 feet in 15 years. One mail order came in, grew it in a container for a year. There it is there, growing in the container. Then I installed it into my garden and grew it there. Hey, it's supposed to be dwarf. It's already 6 feet here after 3.5 years. And now last year, 8 feet. Sometimes in southern gardens, plants that are touted as being dwarf might actually grow faster and get bigger than they're advertised. And so we need to be really careful. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with this plant because it's well over 8 feet in my garden now and starting to encroach on this garden path. So keep in mind when you're choosing dwarf plants, you may need to provide a little bit more space than what you read in the textbooks. And the last part about heat load that I want to communicate is, y'all, when we grow plants that have burgundy spring leaves like Japanese maples, sparkling burgundy, Coppice, here's a contorted filbert cultivar, red majestic. It's a great plant. One out at the Arboretum, leaves emerge with burgundy. Even the Ruby Falls redbud, a lot of the red-leafed plants that emerge in the spring. Please understand that when heat load hits, it's going to start degrading. It's going to start breaking down those anthocyanin pigments, those red pigments, and leaves fade. A lot of new southern gardeners say, I don't understand, that Japanese maple was so beautiful in April, and then by the end of May, beginning of June, the leaves faded to green. It's not a problem. That's just a characteristic that we see in a lot of these plants. And frankly, with these plants, we need to be looking for cultivars that are touted as being those that handle the summer heat. And so I thought Red Majestic might be nice. The one thing I noticed about it is it tends to fade to green, weight lacking. Okay, second tip, Coppice, cutting back shrubs close to the ground to increase their color of their foliage, the size of their foliage, or to provide size control in tight spaces. Not only that, but a way to rejuvenate shrubs. The British gardeners have practiced coppicing for years in very small spaces. They'll use large shrubs, like you see here on the right, the smoke bush, in very small spaces. And the way they manage that is they cut them all the way to the ground every year. And I know for those of you who are gardening, and pruning is a tough thing to do, coppicing is a technique that requires a little bit of bravery and a little bit of faith. But please understand, before I go any further, you coppice only those plants that are established. Coppicing a newly planted tree or shrub, shrub, should not be done. All right, and only certain plants respond well to coppicing. Let's take a look. So there's the idea. We're going to take plants that have colorful foliage, maybe colorful stems, and those colorful stems, like you see in the photo on the right, the yellow twig dogwood, the bigger they get, the more they lose their color. Coppicing is to cut them all the way to the ground in early spring. I do all my cutting back, my coppicing the last week in February, first week in March for Central North Carolina. And when you cut them back, they may look that horrible, but look what you get. And what happens when you cut deciduous shrubs, numbered deciduous shrubs back, like the smoke bush, the leaves, first of all, the stems are more colorful. And then for those that have colorful leaves, the leaves are slightly larger and also more colorful, like you see in that purple smoke bush on the left. Okay, here you can see the results of coppicing, and you see the new foliage coming out, nice and large, nice and healthy. And this is a way to size control and improve the foliage that you get. Now, with some shrubs, smoke bush is a perfect example. Got to be careful, because when you coppice that frequently, most of the time it doesn't recover, even in a long growing season, enough to flower. It just depends on the shrub. And oh, by the way, here's one of my favorite native, one of my favorite southern plants, pokeweed, deciding to poke its head through, and it responds quite nicely to coppicing as well. And I say that tongue in cheek. But coppicing for the red twig and the yellow twig dogwoods and other plants that have colorful stems, if you keep them small, they stay colorful. If you allow them to get bigger, you're going to lose that color. And so whacking them back, as you might say, helps retain that color. And even coppicing done on these red twigs at the Chicago Botanic Garden, you can see the size of the stems that were there before, but then you can see the brilliance of the stem color, basically the coppicing that was done. Spireas lend themselves very well to coppicing, and spireas are great too because you can cut them, whack them back to the ground level on March 1st. You'll get, there's magic carpet on the right-hand side, new gold on the left. Not only will you get beautiful, colorful foliage that's full, but these plants, there's enough time for them to bud up and flower as well because they flower on new season's wood. American beautyberry, one of my favorite native plants. It doesn't tend to get used as much as I think it should because it grows so dang big. Well, how about taking this to the ground March 1st every other year and then letting it grow back? Y'all, that photo that you're looking at was the year where I coppiced it. I cut it all the way back to ground level. And this is what I had by the middle of September. A good 5 to 7 foot shrub covered with those lovely magenta colored fruit, which the birds enjoy. A native that now might fit in a smaller place if you take on the idea of the coppicing. Mark talked a lot about Illicium and Illicium floridanum. This is Halleys Comet. You see it right here down my driveway on the right-hand side. Beautiful evergreen shrub. And Mark, I would add to just letting everybody know that Halleys Comet, all Illicium cultivars, Scorpio and Orion as well, they do well in dry shade. And as an evergreen in dry shade, they tend to do quite well. I get good flowering from them. I have 250-foot white oaks that shade this area. And I've had these in that garden area now for over 20 years. But here's what happened with mine. They got so big that they began to encroach on the driveway, all the way up the driveway. And I was informed by my lovely wife that they were bothering her as she tried to get out of the car. So she said they had to go. Well, I refused. Here's why I refused, okay? Because Halleys Comet, beautiful red flowers clustered every spring and into the summer. And so instead of removing them, here's what I did. I took a chainsaw and I cut them down to the ground. And what you're looking at is all the upper portion of about 10 plants that I cut right down to the ground. And then I waited. And I did that on the 1st of March. And so by early April, look at what I got from the Halleys Comets. Because they were so established and had so much stored food, they began to rejuvenate, the ultimate of coppicing. And by the end of the second year, look what I got back. Now, y'all, the only thing I sacrificed by doing this rejuvenation pruning, the only thing I sacrificed was flowers for 2 years. After 3 years, I got flowers back and the plants are under quote unquote control. Pretty cool idea. So that's number 2. Tip number 3, pruning herbaceous perennials. Why do we do it? I like to prune them to prevent flopping in the summertime, and I do it in early to mid-spring. I do it also to remove the dead flower heads to promote more flowers. I do it in the spring and also in the summer. I do it to control and shape some of my perennials that might be long, leggy, and getting out of control by midsummer. I also cut them all back to the ground, but I'd wait until late winter, middle of February, early spring, beginning of March to cut them back because there's so much seed that birds will feed on, and it provides cover for those birds. And so pruning herbaceous perennials has a number of functions. Flopping, like I mentioned, flopping is a pain. Here's Indian pink right here on the left. Spigelia marilandica, one of my favorite native shade-tolerant plants, next to Annabelle hydrangea, shady location. But because this plant, if you just let it grow without pruning it in the spring, this is what you get. And then you've got to try to stake it and do that kind of thing, that flopping. How can you contest flopping? How can I get my David phlox from falling over, like in this photograph where they're at a reasonable height and even after heavy rain, they don't flop? I cut them back. I'll cut them back as much as 6 to 12 inches back to about 8 to 12 inches in mid-spring. Now, everyone asks me when, and it's kind of intuitive, but I'll usually do it, maybe the end of, maybe mid-May to the end of May, cut them back. And these that got cut back like this, like that, ended up with full white flowers. Here's another plant that Mark mentioned, Amsonia hubrichtii, the Arkansas star, the blue star. This was the 2011 Perennial Plant of the Year. Y'all, once it finishes flowering like that, it flushes again, and the thing gets twice as high and can flop. So what I do after it finishes flowering is cut it back to about 6 inches off the ground. And then by fall, where you get the beautiful yellow fall color, it's at a height that doesn't flop and stays self-contained. And I'm able to display it in places where it's not going to be a bother because it's so incredibly tall. So that's really important. And then I've gotten to cutting back all my perennials all at the same time, about the 1st of March, end of February. The birds, like I said, like to hide in a lot of the dead branches. Let them be. I know we want to get our gardens cleaned up, but here's my new favorite tool for cutting back my perennials. It takes me about 15 minutes, where if I do it by hand, it takes me about 15 hours. Next tip has to do with overwintering. People always ask me, how do I overwinter tender perennials that, maybe they're subtropical, maybe they're zone 8. And then what about those trees and shrubs I have in containers? And here's my idiom for overwintering. Crowd the plants, put them on the north side, and insulate. So if I've got a tender perennial, I might dig it up, put it in my garage, and put it in a pot with mulch or maybe chicken wire around the banana, and then fill it with leaves to insulate it. Okay. Maybe I'll bring those tender plants into an unheated garage and just make sure they stay moist during the winter because they're not getting rain, and they don't experience temperatures that are dangerous to them. Okay. But I like to grow lots of perennial plants in containers. Hosta on the left, ginkgo, Japanese maple, the pineapple lily. So here's what I've seen recommended. Wrap the pot in burlap. Well, to me, that's kind of labor intensive. Here, this person's taking them, putting them up against the north wall on a fence. In my yard, what I do is I take all my plants in containers. I've got a big hemlock tree, a fence, and then the north side of my house. This is all on the north side, and I'll crowd them all together right here up against that fence. I'll also put them up on the patio, crowded together here on the north side. And guys, the north side is important because we want the temperature to stay moderated and not fluctuate. So don't put it on the south side. They don't need the warmth. And then I'll use my gas grill with a cover, but I'll also, if I've got more plants, take bales of pine straw or wheat straw and put them around the outside. Then I just make sure that they stay hydrated during the winter months, and it works out great. Good overwintering, and that's nice. Many of you I know leave your containers right out in the garden, and they do just fine. I'm going to move quickly because I've got about 3 minutes left for a number of others. But in the South, summer and late season deadheading yields more flowers. And because we have such a longer growing season, don't give up on your flowers too soon. David phlox, I deadheaded just a couple weeks ago, right? And this morning, this is the second round of flowering for my David phlox. So deadheading works really well. I continuously deadhead my Allium millennium, and it continues to provide me more and more flowers. Same with a lot of the black-eyed Susan. So y'all, deadheading is real. Do it. Take them off. And because we have such a long growing season, deadhead well into early September. You'll do just fine. And you can get repluming even more so than you might have from northern areas. The last tip, and I know I've just about run out of time, and I want to make sure there's plenty of opportunities for questions. Tell you what, I'll be sure to provide the Arboretum with a PDF file of my talk, which will include the rest of the tips so y'all can see what they are. But the last thing I want to talk about is lawns. In the southern region of the United States, we have some challenges in that North Carolina is considered somewhat, central North Carolina is considered somewhat, what's the right word, transition zone for lawns. We're not ideal for fescue and bluegrass, the cool season grasses. We're also not ideal for Bermuda, zoysia, and other warm season grasses, primarily because of it's the dormancy in the warm season tends to be long, and we're dealing with this brown. And then the fescues generally will oftentimes fescues and bluegrass in the summer, and we find ourselves reseeding on a yearly basis. Okay. The other thing about turf, and Basil kind of alluded to this. We Americans have a fetish on turf. 22 million acres of home lawn. 80% of all homes have a lawn. Lawns take up valuable space at the expense of a biodiverse landscape. They're the number one user of water in the home landscape. They use 3 to 6 times as much water, and they require significantly more input. And so guys, if you don't remember anything from my talk today, remember this. Maybe, just maybe, as a good Southern gardener, and to avoid having to reseed our fescue lawns every year or deal with the brown warm season grasses for a good part of the year, maybe we want to reduce lawn square footage. The idea that we would use turf as a ground cover and not as something to cover the ground with, and then have that be a reduced amount, which promotes diversity. So I'll finish by showing you my own lawn. I have only that much lawn. It's a fescue lawn. It requires very little input, and it gives me more room to plant those plants that thrive in the South. And so perhaps that's a good place for me to stop as far as tips. I think it's really important to learn how the heat load influences how plants grow in your garden, and therefore it's going to influence where you put those plants, sun versus shade. Y'all, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I talk about this and a lot more things in many of the courses that I teach at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum. So check out the calendar. You always see when a new course is coming up. But with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and relinquish the floor to Mark.
All right, Bryce, thank you very, very much. That was great as always. And as Bryce said, he is a regular on our calendar. Keep an eye out. He is always teaching classes, everything from propagation to learning how to be a better gardener by understanding science, to traveling virtually with him to great gardens around the world. He's always got something going on there.